Welcome, welcome. Well, my name's Kevin DeVries, and this is our very first base camp live stream. We anticipated doing something like this down the road. Sorry about the readers here. I'm getting older. It's that 50-something thing. And we just want to welcome you here tonight. This is fantastic that so many of you are plugging in and are part of what we're doing here. So we've been doing base camp live in breweries for about 3 years now. We've had a couple thousand guys that have come to be a part of that. And we've gone very deep and very deliberate with that particular storytelling platform. And we're excited now to take this thing live stream and to actually take it out to the masses, because we were supposed to be launching our women's base camp last month, and that got canceled because of our current crisis. And so we are very grateful that many of you are tuning in here. So this will be more of a family-friendly posture. For those of you that actually come to the breweries across the state of Michigan, you know that they can be a little bit less than family-friendly, but we pledge to you tonight that even though this is a very difficult and delicate story to tell, that we're aware of our viewership. So thank you and welcome for coming on board here. Before I forget, actually even before the story begins or as the story develops, feel free to type in your questions, and Corbin will actually help filter some of those and will feed those to us. So this will be very similar to base camp at a brewery, where the storyteller will tell the story. I'll actually interview, so I'll have certain segments. And then in the interim, and as that's happening in real time, you guys can send your Q&A. So we want this to be interactive. We want this to be immersive. So please do that. And then we'll do our best to pick out a couple questions of those at the end of the evening. So welcome to base camp. People always ask us, why did you choose that name? Well, we live in a flatland area, so this is a little bit harder for those of us in the Midwest to understand this, but I've climbed mountains all over the world enough to know that the way you attack a mountain or conquer a mountain is you camp low and you climb high. And the reason for that is quite simple but very profound, is that nothing actually heals in thin air. So the higher you get up on a mountain, the thinner the oxygen gets. And I came to understand over the course of several years of climbing mountains all over the world that the real active center, the epicenter of any given mountain, is the base camp. It's where stories are told. It's where you can get medical evaluation. It's where you can recalibrate. It's where the communications are all centered. It's how you attack and how you approach a mountain. It's in those conversations that you're actually able to climb some of these peaks. And so we've taken that same metaphor to life, because we understand that an individual know what they can do on the ascent, but they find out actually who they are on the descent. And so we're trying to get men in particular, because we'll always major in men, but their families as well, their wives, their significant others, their children, and get them into this place where the atmosphere is a little bit thicker, where the stories can be told, where some healing can actually happen. And so we find that the best place to do that is in a safe place. So we like to tell dangerous stories in safe places, because we believe that that's where actually shame can be healed. Our sin, if you will, is healed vertically through our relationship with Christ and asking for his forgiveness, which is known as the gospel. But shame is healed in a horizontal way, and it's done through relationships. It's done through confession. It's done through storytelling. It's done through testimony, if you will, in that horizontal plane known as base camp. The other reason why we emphasize story so much is that we believe that the shortest distance from the truth to the human heart is this medium called story. Jesus Christ had many different communication models that he could have used. And for his culture and for his day, he chose story. And so we're trying to mimic first century type of context, where we tell stories, and inside those stories there's a whole bunch of truth. So we don't have to worry about the sermon aspect of it, because the story actually becomes a sermon in of itself. And that's worked out tremendously well for us. So we're going to go to a video right now, rather than me just continually talking about why the name Base Camp and what that's all about. We're going to watch 4 guys on video here talk about their story and the power and importance of story in their lives.
I am an alcoholic and have been in recovery for 12 years.
I was in sexual addiction for 16 years, from the age of 13 to 36 when I got into recovery.
I was a distinguished state trooper who went to prison for 10 years.
So I was a type A personality type of guy, owned and sold several businesses, climbed high mountains all over the world, skied to the North Pole, but found myself years later twice divorced, bankrupt, and living on my vehicle for 5 years.
For much of my life, I was ashamed of my story, how God had written my story, and It took an 8-year prison sentence to actually learn how to run to my story.
I've told the short version of my story easily 100 and sometimes, which I say is the first step. And that's probably a 6 to 7 minute synopsis of how I was powerless over alcohol in my life and becoming manageable.
The first time I told my story was over 10 years ago, and what I found from telling my story was that not only did it bring some healing to other people, but it actually healed me to share my story.
It was only until I learned how to tell my story that I unlocked something greater. I was actually able to find healing.
I tell my story so that others can have hope, that this doesn't have to be the end for them, that they can get out of this and be free from this. Sexual addiction or any kind of addiction doesn't have to define who they are.
So I think the greatest tragedy that we have as humans is an untold story. There's just something tragic about a person living their whole life and never having the opportunity from start to finish to be able to tell their story to another human and have their humanity be embraced in such a way that healing can occur.
Most men generally, we keep things inside to ourselves, and we're not used to getting out and sharing these things, and we want to be in a safe space where we can share things, especially deep things or troubling things from our past. And so Base Camp has become a safe haven, a safe space where men can share their stories.
These type of things, whether they're story retreats or base camps or these story-centered events that are Christ-centered, have a way of allowing a man to own his story. And when he owns his story, he's able to offer his story. And when he can offer his story, he gets his strength back.
It's important to go through your own story so that you can find where you need to get healing and where you can have an opportunity to find freedom from those wounds of your past that are hanging on to you, that you don't even know necessarily are uncovered until you start working through the journey of your story. And by doing that, then you find healing, you find that there's community, you find that you're not alone and isolated.
We never really get our strength back as men if we don't have the skills to interpret our story correctly, if we can't see the bigger story that's happening. And oftentimes when we go to a movie, we read a book, we hear another man's story, we're always, whether we're cognitive of this or not, we're always looking for a way to interpret our own lives, and we do that by listening, watching, and hearing another man's story.
I think learning to tell your story is such a key, for me it's a key part of the grace and redemption side of what Base Camp is. It's one thing to listen to the story. There's things, when I hear other people's story I relate to, but actually doing the work of putting it on paper and actually telling it, that's where I really discovered a lot about myself, about my childhood, about my marriage, about other things that affected me besides just the alcoholism.
You're going to stumble into your purpose. I don't know how it works, but pain diabolically and divinely encrypts your purpose. If you find your pain, you find your purpose. If you run from your pain, you're running from your purpose. And ultimately, you're running from your story, which is how the gospel is communicated to people. It's through changed lives. Most notably, what Jesus did for us on the cross. So welcome back. Those were some stories from some guys that are actually part of our Grace Explorations tribe, and we told those stories in brief because we want you to understand that your story is actually your strength. And if you don't come fully circle back to your story, you spend the rest of your life actually running from your strength. It's one of those weird things, we think that we have to run away from some of our past issues, but in reality, our future has to go through our past. And we all find ourselves in a very epic story at the present moment. And Phil Niekerk, who actually works at Ada Bible Church, came to me a couple of months ago after he heard me tell my resurrection story at Railtown Brewery back in December, and just felt like God was just kind of tugging on his heart, just saying, now's the time to share this part of your story. And neither one of us knew that this was going to happen in a digital format. We thought we were going to do this live. Phil is actually in charge of all the small group ministry at Ada Bible Church across all 4 of their campuses, and also oversees their men's ministries. And we've done a few things in ministry together, speaking at your WOW game dinner and a few other situations that I had no clue that this particular story that you're going to tell within your own story had actually happened. And I think it's very appropriate for us to unpack this story in the time that we have, in the times that we live in, because many of you, quite frankly, right now, If you're a human and you're on planet Earth, you're just trying to figure out what in the world is happening here. The world as I knew it, life as I knew it, is looking dramatically different moving forward. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. There's a lot of fear floating around. There's a lot of anxiety that's filling the atmosphere. And I think God actually put this time for us together for Phil to share this story. It's a very delicate, it's a very daring, it's a very dangerous story, quite frankly. But told in a safe place, it can be a very powerful thing that we hope will help other people begin to journey into their own story. So, Phil, without further ado, maybe you can take us into your brother-in-law, who he was as a person, and then maybe take us into that fateful day in 2014 where you felt like your whole world was just upended.
Yeah, yeah, Kevin, thanks for inviting me to do this. This is an honor, and the story it's very important. It's been important to our family, and my sister and I have told this story multiple times over the last 6 years. It's been a couple of years since I've shared this publicly, and so we've learned a ton from it. Yeah, before I jump into the story as it is, I'd love to describe my brother-in-law to you.
Yeah.
And who he was. Kurt was, he's one of my favorite people. He was my sister's husband. They were married for over 30 years. He was a big brother to me. Ever since they met and she started bringing him home, I looked at this guy as somebody that I could model my life after.
Yeah.
He was a big brother. He was a mentor. He was a ton of fun to be with. One of the best sense of humor that I've ever met. He's the type of guy that you got 10 minutes to spend with him, you wanted a whole hour because he was fun to be with. He was funny. He laughed at his own jokes, which made it even more funny. He had this gregarious laugh and beautiful smile.
You can almost take the in-law part off. It sounds like you're describing a brother.
Yeah, and I grew up without brothers. I grew up with two sisters who I love, but I never had a brother.
Yeah.
And so my brother-in-laws became that for me, and Kurt was one of those. As a young teenager, getting acquainted with him, I thought, man, this is so good to have a brother in my life. Fast forward the tape a few years where I get called into ministry in my mid-30s, and he became a ministry mentor to me because he was in ministry for quite a while in Colorado as a youth pastor and came back to Michigan about 15 years ago, and we talked a lot of ministry together. I would ask him questions. He would help me out. We even talked from time to time about what it'd be like to actually do ministry together. I don't know if that would ever happen, but we dreamed about it, and from my side of the table, I was always looking forward to that opportunity. I thought he would be a joy to serve alongside. He was a good pastor. His church, I think they would still say, they just loved him, and he loved them. And that church was vibrant, is vibrant. It was making a difference in their community. At Kurt's funeral, and we'll get to some of that later, people would say anything in their little town that was good had his fingerprints all over it.
So we're talking about a good man here.
It's a good man because as we get into this story a little bit, I think my fear is we would villainize him a little bit because there's some tough things I need to say about Kurt in the story. But and it's also, this is what made it so surprising, it's so shocking.
Yeah.
When we uncovered the difficult side of his life.
That he, like many of us, did very well in hiding.
He did very well. He was a master at it.
Yeah.
He was, I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he did it for so long. That side of his life, that corner of his life, and how deep that went, how he hid it so long is just tremendous. Just,
almost like Paul talked about a divided mind, a man divorced from himself.
Yeah, and love for us to talk about isolation a little bit later, because I'd say Kurt was a dude that you would never describe him as being isolated, because he always had people around him. He was always with people and loving people, engaging with people. He was an extrovert. He would never say this man's isolated, but a certain sliver of his life, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a master of hiding that.
And probably in many ways, like a lot of us, I would think, we tend to do a lot of good things to cover up some bad things.
Sure.
We're almost our own psychologists. We have this guilt, this engine inside of us that has to be medicated or dealt with to cover up some things that we're not so proud of, that we want remain hidden, quite frankly, prefer to take to the grave with us.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's a word for some of us here tonight that are listening to this story, is like, ask yourself, what's the engine under the hood here?
Yeah.
Here was a good man, and we'll get into the story of some of the choices that were made, but here's a good man that's doing a lot of good things. And sometimes, and it's weird for those of you that are maybe in ministry and you're listening to this what will eventually become a podcast, be careful that the work of Christ doesn't kill the life of Christ inside of you. It'll leave you haunted, and this could be anything. It doesn't have to be ministry, just doing good things. There's a lot of people who are doing really good things right now because some bad things are happening. So it's beautiful to see the way America, the spirit of America, is rising up. But I think you've developed a sense of who this guy is, that this is a good man. People love him, and yet there's this undercurrent, this other narrative that's happening concurrently at the same time. Maybe you could walk us through what that day felt like.
Yeah, it all came to the surface on a Friday in June 2014. I'll tell it through my sister's eyes. They were on a date together. Been married 30 years, and many Friday nights I think they spent together on a date. Good restaurant, good meal, ice cream on the way home, shopping, just an ordinary day, a good Friday for them. They stopped at a gas station as they entered into their little town, and Brenda, my sister, she asked to use his phone. She had forgotten her phone at home, and Kurt became very defensive, protective, pensive about his phone at that particular moment. I think she was sniffing that there was something off kilter, and so she persisted. I mean, she just kept pushing. I really need to use your phone. I want to call our son. And she won the argument, and he ended up throwing the phone through the window as he's pumping gas. And as she tells it, she says she picked the phone up with some suspicion. And she said, my finger just touched something, and it opened up a text that, I don't know if it was just received or just came through. But in that text, it was very, very evident to her that he was in communication with someone on a sexual level. On a graphic level. This was something that was new, that she had never seen in him before. And as you can imagine, that led to an argument. What is this type thing going on? She never let him back in the car. She moved over into the driver's seat, grabbed the keys, told him to walk home. They were only a few blocks from home. And she drove home, very upset, rightfully so. I was able to see that text the next day, and I know exactly what she saw, and she had full reason to be tremendously upset when she read. And so she drove home, and
this is hitting her like a tsunami.
Yeah.
That she had no real clue of anything, and then it just...
Yeah, it was like she says, it was a normal day.
Yeah. Until
that gas station stopped. I think she fully expected Kurt to come walking home, and for them to deal with it, whatever that was at the time, for them to deal with it, and he didn't come home that night. And so she called a friend, and a friend came and stayed with her that night, and fully hoping that he would walk through the door. And no phone calls. He didn't have his phone. She kept his phone. She didn't give it back. And she went to bed, and he didn't come home. I get pulled into the story the next day. It's Saturday morning. I'm with some friends. We played golf that morning. It was a beautiful day. I remember it. I might have even played good golf because I remember being happy when that phone call came in. We were joking around in the back of my buddy's car and on the way home from 18 holes. And
so she slept in this overnight, and then you're finding out the next day.
Next day. She didn't call me that night. The next day, things got a little more intensified. So I get a phone call, and it's not from Brenda, it's from her friend. And at first I don't recognize the number, so I don't pick up. And then I hear this message. I had to listen to what this voicemail is, and it almost wasn't coherent to me. So I knew who it was. So I called her back, and I said, can you say what you said again? And she was very clear with me of the message that she gave on that voicemail. She said three things. She said, Kurt's been unfaithful to Brenda. He's gone missing. We haven't seen him all night. And we just got a phone call from him this morning, and he sounds very suicidal. You need to come as soon as you can. Sat back in the seat of my buddy John's car, and I thought, this doesn't make sense. I know what all those words mean.
Yeah. Did you feel like you were in a nightmare, or like there was a surreal quality to this? Like, what?
You know, being a pastor, I've heard a lot of rough stories, and nothing surprises me
Yeah.
when someone calls with a care situation. But when this call comes and the name connected to it is Kurt,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. It is surreal. But you realize something as bad is happening. You go into, do I really believe that? It can't be this bad. Could it
Yeah.
be this bad? I need to get there. So I find myself in her living room a couple hours later. They live about an hour north of us. And in the living room when I arrive is my sister and her friend. One of Kurt's brothers is found out, and his wife is there. His two sons, which I think they're 17 and 23 at the time, were wandering around the house. They weren't sitting in the circle. And then I arrive, and I got up to speed to what was going on with them. And they said that Kurt had called that morning. They haven't seen him since, and that he was very upset. And his words were, I don't want to be a blight. I'll make it look like an accident. You don't have to live with my stuff. Just don't tell anybody, and I'll just make it look like an accident. And they're going, Kurt, come home. Just come home. And he didn't. And so they got me up to speed, and then my sister did something. She handed me his phone, and she said, here, figure this out. I go, figure it out? Yeah, I'd like to know, who is this person he's with? Who is he talking to? And one of his sons walked by and said, try this passcode and see if it works. And we dialed the passcode, and poof, his phone opened up to me. And I said, well, here we go. Who here wants to look at this? And they said, we want you to do that. I think that's when I felt the weight on my shoulders, that there's going to be some things that I'm going to see and experience. And so I jumped in, and I found that text that Brenda had seen. And then I started reading back, not reading out loud, but they were watching me as I read through his phone. And I said, I don't believe that this is a romantic conversation that's happening here. It doesn't sound like he's falling in love with someone and he's going to leave you for. It sounds like this is a graphically sexual conversation that has had personal contact. And he said, who is this? Do you know who it is? And I said, just hold on, let me flip around a little bit. And I did. I flipped around a little bit, and I had a secondary discovery that was important to the narrative of this story. It wasn't just one conversation. He was having, I found four. 4 conversations with 4 different women, all graphically sexual in nature. And I'm not sure that was good news or bad news, but it did change the narrative, because I think we were all afraid that he was involved with someone. Just hopefully it wasn't part of his church or part of the community, a friend. But it wasn't that case. He was having these graphic relationships with women from who knows where.
Yeah.
And so Brenda asked, she says, where is he finding these people?
And all this is happening. You don't know where he is right now.
We don't know where he's at.
I mean, so there's layers to this.
He's made one contact.
Okay.
And that was
it wasn't a good call.
Wasn't good at all.
Yeah.
And I went to his web browser, and I found on that Friday hit after hit after hit after hit on Craigslist and the personal ads. I had no clue how shady some of those could be. And he was, that day that he got caught, was just looking for more, looking for more, looking for more, looking for more, while he was involved with 4 conversations with 4 different women. And so that did change the narrative. We began to believe this is not a romantic affair, that he was planning to leave for another woman, but he was deeply and sexually addicted.
Yeah.
And that he had crossed some pretty big lines. And no one had a clue that this was happening. It's just, there was no signs of this. There was no indications that this tsunami was coming. It was just happening.
Yeah.
We felt we were in a free fall. Absolute free fall.
Wow. So tremendous uncertainty. Everybody's world's blowing up.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit probably like a pandemic of sorts.
I think about it, it's just a Saturday. Kurt's supposed to preach on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we had to let his church know. We had to let his elders know. Those are incredible conversations. Really good salt of the earth men who love God, love the church, love Kurt. Had to endure that message of what we as a family were discovering. They had to now be pulled into that story because they had a Sunday service coming.
Yeah.
And I found myself now beginning to be pulled into a few things. I've found myself at the centerpiece, being the go-between between my family and the church, go-between to both sides of the family, my side and Kurt's family. And so I started to feel just the weight of this story coming on us.
Yeah. You're almost like a first responder. You're seeing things so that other people don't have to see it. But you're also relationally connected. This guy is like a brother to you. And it's your sister. So all this revelation stuff comes to the surface. Where is Kurt at this point?
We don't know. That whole Saturday, we did a little driving around. We tried to look for him. The police were notified. We kept praying and hoping he'd walk down the driveway. He must have just called
from a public phone or a payphone or something. I guess they exist somewhere, but
we kind of think he might have called from his office, which is strange that we didn't think of that.
Yeah.
But there's a possibility. We just don't know. But that whole day went. It came and went, and he didn't come. He didn't contact. We kept, and in the back of our mind, we're waiting for the police to call us and saying something happened, and it didn't happen. Got late at night. Brenda says, "Go home. I've got friends here. Go get some rest. Come back tomorrow." I got up on Sunday morning. Actually went to church. I was at the Kentwood campus at Ada Bible. Was walking into the auditorium, and my phone rings, and I look, and it's Brenda, and I step out. To this day, I can still, when I walk by that particular spot in that hallway at that campus, there's times I'll stop and look at that piece of carpet and say, I don't want to spend any time here.
Yeah.
This is a bad spot. Answered the phone, and I said, Brenda, what's going on? And her words were, Phil, he's gone. He's gone. I said, what do you mean he's gone? Did he leave? Did he run? Where is he? Phil, he's dead. The police are pulling his car out of a lake. He drove his car at a high rate of speed into a lake sometime in the night, and his body was there. He's gone. I need you here. The story dramatically changes because, the day before we're thinking, how do we save a marriage and a church from infidelity? How do we help Kurt come clean from all of the sin? How deep is this? To now we have death.
Yeah.
Now we have suicide.
Which is the thing about suicide. And for those of you that are viewing, I don't want to be naive enough to think that nobody that's listening right now has ever not experienced this, because suicide it's a powerful thing. And this story is now interrupted with suicide. And what I think we need to just pause here for a moment and help us understand is that suicide doesn't necessarily guarantee that anything bad will ever happen again. It just guarantees that that the good can never happen again. The things that could have been reconciled, the things that could have come full circle. And who knows what was going through his mind in those final moments, but certainly the pain and the shame and the fear, the guilt was just driving him into a space where, he wasn't himself.
I believe that.
And I want to pause here and then we'll give Phil a moment to just this is a hard story to tell, but if you're in that space tonight, or you know someone that's in that space because of what's happening currently, the unfortunate thing about a global pandemic is it pushes people that are already on the edge, either mentally or emotionally, pushes them even further. But if you're in that space and you know someone that's in that space, please reach out to people. We have people that we call soul surgeons at Grace Explorations. You can go to our website at graceexplorations.com, click resources, and scroll down, find healing. Kevin DeCam, who may be watching tonight, Matt Kenny, who you've worked with, are what we call soul surgeons. Gary Heim is also on our website. He helps with our story retreats. But these are men that can come into a situation and remove some of that shrapnel. Had Kurt have stayed in his story, there would have been a lot of shrapnel to have to remove, a lot. Yeah. And it would have hurt, and it would have been long, and it would have been arduous, and there's no guarantee of a ideal outcome, but suicide is never, ever the answer. And I don't know who's listening right now, but if this is triggering something inside of you, or you need to make a phone call, if you see these signs, and I'm not an expert in this area, so we don't want to give any pretense here that this is a therapy session. But if those are real emotions and real choices that people are looking at, please, please reach out. Don't go at it alone. Don't isolate. Don't do something in the heat of an emotional moment that could have lasting effects forever. So they pull the car out of the lake. He's inside the car. He is now passed into the next dimension. He's not part of our time-space continuum. Now you're left with, where is God in the middle of all this?
Yeah, the next couple of days were very, very difficult, as you can tell. Conversations with the church, conversations with law enforcement. There was something spinning in Grand Rapids that particular weekend where there was a radio personality that was arrested for child pornography, and because of that, Homeland Security was looking over the shoulder at this one. Are these two people related? Do they know each other? Is there something bad going on underneath the surface? So for me, it meant a few hours in the undersheriff office with a lead detective, wondering if there's a connection. There wasn't. We're very grateful for that. Yeah. The two were not connected, and there were two separate stories. But it added a layer of incredible tension in that. News media was starting to arrive, and we were always wondering what they were going to say. Family members were arriving from around the country as well. And so knowing what to say and how to say it and what people need to have the whole story, it was just a spin. Our heads were spinning of what to do. And then there was what's God up to? Where is God here? What's happened? He mentioned Matt Kenny, his great friend. Matt talks about memories. And he says there's Teflon memories and there's Velcro memories.
Interesting.
And Teflon memories are a lot of good ones. They just kind of slide off you. The Velcro ones, they stick with you. They're ones that you can close your eyes and put yourself back in the scene, even years later. And
a certain piece of carpet can bring you right back there.
That's one of those.
Yeah. There
was a few others of that week that I would call, those are just Velcro. There was one in particular, his funeral was scheduled to be on Wednesday, and on Tuesday we had a visitation. We knew that it'd be a pretty large crowd, so we had it at the church and not at the funeral home. It was so ironic to walk in to see Kurt in his open casket in front of the pulpit that he was supposed to be preaching in front of, behind that weekend. Before the big crowds came through, we scheduled a time as just family, just to spend some time in grief and community with each other. And I found myself sitting alone in a certain side of the auditorium, just watching all of this take place. And on the wall, one of Kurt's sisters had beautifully put together a slide presentation of his life, set to music, scripture connected to it. The pictures were beautiful. They were happy. They went back to many memories that we had as a family. And I found myself really enjoying that, really enjoying remembering Kurt for who he was.
Yeah.
But I had just a difficult time wrestling with the images and the words that I've seen on his phone over the last few days. I'm seeing the happy Kurt on the wall, and I'm seeing the the cheating, addicted Kurt in my mind on the phone, just all the things that I've seen that nobody else has seen. Because I did a pretty deep dive into his phone to figure out what was going on, and didn't show it to anyone else. I was going to carry that load for our family. But those two images just paired against each other were confusing to me. And then the third piece confusing to me was there's Kurt's coffin there.
Yeah.
In the same room. Happy Kurt, cheating Kurt, shame-filled, fear-filled, suicide Kurt.
Yeah.
And I was left to just ponder these questions. Kurt, how'd you get here? This is not what you intended. This is not what you dreamed for your life. It's definitely not what your family wants. I know Kurt well enough this is not where he intended to be at the age of 54 when he passed away. How did you get here? Because this is a mess. This is a tremendous mess. And you, Kurt, are dealing with this face to face with Jesus now. And we're all here dealing with this with each other, wondering, how deep is this going to go? How hard is the fall going to be? How long will the shrapnel have to be pulled out of us?
Yeah.
It was confusing. My faith was rattled. As a pastor, as a follower of Christ, there are times throughout this I just said, can I even continue? Should I even continue? Do I still believe? Because this is really shaking me.
Where are you at in reconciling that chapter with the goodness of God? I know these are big overarching theological questions, but a lot of people are asking that right now as we're all collectively together as a globe, as a planet, walking through a global pandemic. How did you process that? And I'm not going to presuppose that you're already all the way through that, but you've obviously maintained it strong enough to be able to share here tonight.
Yeah.
I know you probably drew on years of your own faith. You were not new to the faith, so you had decades of walking with Christ. Some people don't have that at all,
Right.
which is very delicate to walk into an extreme situation like that. But how did you reconcile that? Or how did you begin to reconcile the goodness of God with sometimes the harsh realities of life? Sometimes life is not very good. How can God be good at the same time?
I think there's a multiple factors that were really helpful to me over time. It didn't happen with a snap of a finger. It happened in community with people that I know and trust and love. One's my wife. The other was watching my sister at the epicenter of this incredible earthquake. Wrestle through the most complex grief, but begin to struggle toward hope, to begin to teach me about hope, about perseverance. Even in the darkest of her hours, she went through tremendous pain for years and probably still has some of that. But to watch her model to me what it means to cling to the God of her childhood and the God of the Bible that she opens up every day, and to continually place hope in God was tremendous. To be able to sit with close friends and get it all out on the table. There was a moment during all of that I want to say I had a meltdown, but I was close to just going, I got to get out of here. And funeral planning, police interviews, all this stuff.
You're probably exhausted. I mean,
I was. There was a lot of conversations, and at the end of one day, I just got so tired. I got in my truck and I just started driving, and I called a colleague of mine. He's a campus pastor at Ada now, Kevin Baker, and he goes, "Dude, I heard. How are you?" I said, "Not well.
yeah.
Struggling. We're getting through." He goes, "Where are you? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just driving around." He says, "I'll meet you somewhere." And okay, and we ended up at a Big B in Lowell. And he brought another colleague. His name is Doug Bishop. Was a pastor at Ada during that time. We were tight. The three of us were tight. We'd spent a lot of time together. And they weren't there as pastors. They were there as friends.
Yeah.
And I still wonder what the barista at that Big B thought of those three guys. Because there's one dude slamming his fist on the table, screaming, I won't say screaming, but saying things like, God's a loser here. God is lost.
You're being real.
I'm being real.
Yeah.
I'm lamenting in front of my brothers.
Yeah.
And they're listening to it. I think they said a few things. I can't remember a word they said back to me, but they listened, they encouraged, and they prayed.
Unlike Job's friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they stood me back up, put me in my car, and sent me back to the battle.
Wow.
And didn't know at the time how important that was.
Yeah.
But that's one of those really good Velcro memories I have of community, guys who love Jesus, who don't have all the answers, just saying, you can do this. God is still good.
Yeah. They allowed you to be real
Yeah.
and let God take care of the right part. And they gave you a safe place to do that, to just vent it out, you know?
Yeah, it was the first lament
Yeah.
that I had. It was in the middle of that. And there was times that...
Were you surprised and shocked? I mean, I just learned before this interview that you're a PK kid as well. I mean, were you surprised what was coming out of your mouth? Like, I theologically know better than this, but right now I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, I've always believed that God is good. I've always trusted God's promises in his word. I've always believed in God's people. And all of that was now being shook
Yeah.
by an earthquake. And in my finite mind, in the moment of that earthquake, there was things coming into my heart and the head like, God didn't win here. I can't reconcile this. I can't reconcile this right now in this moment that God is winning. It looks like he's coming up behind Satan's mess, and you got me again there. I couldn't see any goodness in that time, and sometimes you don't.
What does that look like? You're now almost 6 years removed. What does that look like for you now? Like maybe you're obviously coming from a different place of strength. The emotions are still real. I mean, you're still feeling this. It's, in the tremble of your voice and in your eyes, you can still feel that there's some residual pain there, but there's also a lot of hope I see inside of you. Yeah. Like maybe take our viewers and our listeners to the place where you are right now, almost 6 years removed, and what you've learned, maybe some takeaways, because this is this story can end more than just one life.
Yeah.
The bodies may still live on, but something can die to the extent that it's like that whole saying that the great tragedy is not necessarily death, but what dies inside you before you die. And I'm just encouraged, and I want to just bless you with, I've got a whole lot more respect for you now knowing this part of your story, because it's one thing to minister from a position of being a little bit detached from pain in your own life, but to have to process through something that is, suicide it's a very difficult topic, any way you look at it. And especially when it hits home like it did for you, but to be able to still give and to give people hope when you probably had every right to just shut down and just check out. But you didn't. So what does that look like for you now, 6 years? What are you drawing on? Maybe speak to the current demise that we find ourselves in right now. What's words of hope that we can give people of what does it look like for you now?
If you wouldn't mind, there's another piece of Kurt's story that I think I still anchor to. There was maybe a month after Kurt's death, we had found out some more things about Kurt. We had found out that what we were seeing on his phone wasn't just a few months old. It was 5 years plus old. He had been doing this for a long time. And my sister had the courage to ask Kurt's church board if she could report that to the church at a congregational meeting. And she asked me that night, she said, I'm going to tell the full story to the church. Would you come up behind me and give a spiritual perspective?
Wow.
And at the time, I thought, what am I going to say? And she says, God will tell you. God will give you those words.
It sounds like the Bible.
And God did.
Yeah.
And I still think back to the words I gave because I don't believe they were my words. They were words that God gave me to that congregation that helped me throughout the time. because it helped me re-believe in God's redemptive power.
That's a key word, re-believe.
Re-believe.
Yeah.
I believe again.
Yeah.
Because some of that had been taken away.
Yeah.
And I had to believe again. What I said to the congregation that night, I gave them four things to think about. I said, one, I think God has been incredibly patient with Kurt. I believe that Kurt has been involved in this addiction, this sin for many, many years. And that I believe there's been opportunities for Kurt to stop crossing lines and to step into the light and to make a choice to say, I need help. I need assistance here because left to my own, I can't seem to conquer this.
Yeah.
I think this had tormented Kurt. But yet, I think he enjoyed it too. It gave him something. It did something for him, and he couldn't shake it on his own.
It's the nature of addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
I think God was patient with Kurt. And the second thing is I think God has been merciful with you as a church, merciful with us as a family. That church was prospering. That church was doing some great work under Kurt's leadership. Even when that was in Kurt's backdrop, the church was a light in that community, was doing awesome things. People were coming to faith. Marriages were being saved. A lot of great things were happening. And God, you can only describe that as God being merciful.
Yeah.
And then I said the third thing is, but I believe that God's patience and mercy sometimes comes to an end, where God says, it's enough. It's enough. Kurt, if you won't step into the light, I'm going to shed the light on you. I'm going to put it on you. And then it's going to be really bright. It's going to be really painful, but you can do this. I'm going to shed light on this so you can deal with it. And I think we're all disappointed with Kurt's choice as the light was shown on him to suicide. We would so rather be dealing with the implications of his choices and helping him restore his life, or helping him then deal with the suicide.
Yeah.
And Kurt made the wrong choice again. I think
He
suicide
saw it as an end, not as a potential new beginning.
But the fourth thing I said to this church, and I had to remind myself, I look back and I go, man, I was preaching myself. And what I said to them was, God's not done with you. You've gone through something very tragic and unbelievable, but God still wants you to be a light in this community. God has great things for you. You are still his body. You have a ton of healing to do, but there's good things that you will do. And God will do through you, despite this. And I remember that outline. It's one of those things that stuck with me. I don't think they did, I don't know if they did or not. But for me, that 4-point outline was helpful to me in saying, this is where I need to watch for God. This is how I can somehow understand this and explain this, that God was patient. He was merciful, and God does say enough.
Yeah.
Please, if you don't step toward me, I'm going to step toward you.
Yeah.
And we're going to stop this. And we just kept walking through authentic community with one another. We watched ourselves heal to get better. We're still enduring a lot of shrapnel. It doesn't go away. This is just going to be a piece of our life.
Yeah.
But there's hope and there's restoration. I get to do my sister's wedding this October. She found a awesome dude. We love him. And we think that it's not going to solve all her problems, but it gives her companionship again. Yeah. It gives beauty in her life.
Yeah.
And it really is a testament to her managing through this complicated grief over many, many years. And so she's become my hero. My faith has been restored by watching her faith. I don't think her faith ever had to be restored. I don't think she ever lost it. But she went through tremendous difficulty and tremendous lament, and is coming through in just a very beautiful way. But she still wears the grief.
Yeah.
It's still there, and it will be there for probably to the end of her days.
Yeah, it's almost like some wounded warrior friends that I have that have struggled on the battlefield, and there's just some pieces of shrapnel that are so embedded or so close to vital organs that time in the natural process actually has to let those be released, because to go in and be invasive, you could kill the person over it. And I think God in his mercy just allows this to happen over time, because too much all at once could just take us out. Do you have any parting wisdom? We're going to go into Q&A in here in just a minute. But anything, maybe just a nugget to wrap up all this, because it's a story that obviously has many facets and we were only able to skim over it. But what would you leave the people with today as a kind of a take-home?
Yeah, if I could maybe talk about two things quickly. One is the word isolation, because when you look back at Kurt and you see that here's this gregarious, lovable dude that everybody liked and loved and lived life fully. A piece of his life was lived in isolation that was really destroying him. And I think he knew it was destroying him, and he just didn't know what to do. A friend of mine talks about playing poker. You play poker and some of the cards are out on the table where everybody can see, but you always hold some back, right? You always hold those one or two cards back that nobody can see, and they're guessing what it is and what you have. Kurt was playing poker, and there was a card or two in his life that he would just not put on the table. And I think this breaks up. You don't do this in a poker game, but you do this in life. You play all your cards with somebody that you trust. Find people in your life. You go, I trust you. I'm struggling. Someone needs to know before you cross all these lines. And that's the thing with sexual sin. You'll cross lines and not even know you're crossing lines. And then you'll look back and say, how did I get here? Oh my goodness, if anybody were ever to know, nobody could ever know. It would be the end of me. And I believe Kurt literally said that.
Yeah.
This will be the end of me if someone ever finds out.
Yeah.
What if we all struggle? What if it's some line that we say, I need to trust somebody. I need to play that card. I need to step out of isolation. I need to step into the light, and I need to trust God's good people to help me find a better path. And so the word isolation is important to us now with this pandemic.
It's a big word.
But it's something to wrestle with.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, I think all of us are going to find ourselves, and some of us are right now, in a free fall in life, where 20 years ago, I fell out of a tree stand getting ready for bow hunting. And I did something stupid with the tree stand and didn't hook it up right. But I look back at that, and my memory of falling out of the tree stand is in slow motion. I can remember that feeling of, oh no.
This may not end well.
I am going down.
Yeah.
And I don't know how this is going to end.
Yeah.
And I think we find ourselves in these free falls in life where, like Kurt, our free fall was the choices that Kurt made. Somebody else made these choices. Now I'm in a free fall. We find ourselves in a free fall because we've made the choices. The dude who has too many drinks one night at the bar and gets a DUI, he's in a free fall.
Yeah.
Because of the choices he made. And sometimes we find ourselves in a free fall because the world is broken. We're in a pandemic. We didn't choose this. Nobody chose this. Where is God in all this? But we're falling. We don't know how we're going to land.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you find yourself there, you really have to examine your foundation. You really have to take a strong look and saying, what do I believe? And for me, the three things were, is God's word true? Is God's character good? And can I trust God's people?
Say those three again, because we have some viewers that are actually following up on our talk in small groups. Say those again. Those are really good.
Is God's word true?
Mm-hmm.
Can I open my Bible and believe it?
Yeah.
And the answer long term for me was, yeah, absolutely. Is God's character good, even when everything around me seems to be a mess? Is God still good? And can I see that? And the third one is, can I trust God's people? Are there people in my life that are trustworthy for me to live life in a genuine, authentic way that will help me grow through the free fall that I'm going to have? Everybody has them. Some of us are having them right now.
Yeah.
Some of them, bigger ones are coming, but whether it's a cancer diagnosis, a pandemic, a suicide, a job loss, car accident, you find yourself in, I don't know what to do here. Are my foundations true? Are they real? And can I lean in on those, Or am I going to let go of those and get jaded, get bitter, be angry, shake my fist at God for the next 20 years? And shake my fist a couple of times at him, but not for 20 years. I want to be able to say, God, you heard my cry. And I believe you. I trust you.
Yeah. Wow. Phil, thank you for sharing. Can you stick around a little bit for Q&A?
No
That
place
was
to go, bud.
Yeah, that was powerful. I don't even know where to go with this, but a couple of points to parallel. And those three questions were fantastic because they're foundational questions. And it takes almost a lifetime to unpack some of those. But the book of Job is one of those incredible stories, maybe the oldest story in all of the Bible, that talks about a man who lost everything and spent the first 40 chapters with his friends. And everybody was like, you didn't do enough devotions. You didn't pray enough. There's secret sin. You were afraid. Your fear attracted all these things. And at the end of the day, God just showed up and said, Job, I can't answer your questions because if I do, you essentially will explode into a million pieces. You don't have the bandwidth to comprehend what I have done, which is to set the stars into the void, as ornaments on some kind of cosmic Christmas tree. You weren't here when I separated air from land and water from land. And what God did do, though, and what he's done for Phil and what he's done for Phil's sister and what he'll do for you is instead of answering your questions, which are in many ways they're actually not good questions to begin with, even though we have to ask them. He can't answer those questions necessarily, but what he can do is he can answer your unanswerable questions with his unquestionable self. He can give you the gift of himself. And when we look at the end of the book of Job, God answered Job fully. Didn't answer his questions, but he gave Job himself. And at the end of that long lament, that's the key word tonight, along with isolation, is Job felt that he was answered. And then his life had a new beginning. And there's a new beginning for you as well. And so I would just encourage you, life may be tough for the next couple months, the next year, who knows? I can't look down and forecast that, but what I can tell you this is that God is inherently good, and sometimes life is also bad, but those can run parallel. Don't confuse God with life. We live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. There's sin. There's diseases. We're not on the other side into the next dimension yet. And so don't be quick to fault that on God or treat it as if God can't stop this, so he must not be all loving. But when you think about it, if God's going to be all powerful, he also has to be all suffering. He has to suffer with us, which is basically what Christ did for us on the cross, as he suffered for our sin and took that shame and that guilt that Kurt and all of us bear. Some of us to a premature grave, some of us for the length of our days. There's many forms of suicide. It's not necessarily physical. Some of us are dying slowly every day and we don't even know it. And so I would encourage you, community was a big word all throughout this story. You need to find safe people. You need to find people that you can unpack these secrets so you can no longer be sick, so you're no longer projecting and scapegoating all your unresolved pain on other people or addictions or false hopes or idols, whatever the case might be. But you come back to Almighty God and you ask him to strip you bare as a surgeon would to a patient. So much of what we've talked about in this discussion is this idea that at the end of the day, what God is really trying to do is actually punitive. It's not, it's not punitive. It's actually redemptive. He's trying to bring about some healing in your life. And to do that, he has to go in and surgically remove some of these things. And it's painful, but it's redemptive. So let's go to some, we have one final slide here that I'd like to show. And it's just one point to drive home. And it's this idea of don't practice emotional and spiritual distancing. It will kill you. Don't isolate. Find a community that you can be real with. We like to emphasize that at Grace Explorations, and I know Ada does that really well in small groups, is you have to be real. Jesus wanted people to get real. He'd always ask them a question. He wasn't looking necessarily for the right answer. He was looking for the real answer, because if they gave the real answer, then things can begin to heal. And so give the real answer, and then God will make your situation right. He has the bandwidth and the ability to do that. But don't isolate. You've got to get out there and talk to people. And whether that's Skyping now or Zoom or this type of podcast, you have to connect with humans as best as you can and start letting this stuff come up to the surface in a community. The other thing I want to talk about very briefly, if we can put up our Next slide is this idea that we would love to have you partner with us. This is similar to a physical base camp that we have at a brewery in that it costs money every time we go into a brewery, usually just a couple $100 to rent the space and to do those type of base camps. And it's about the same for this digital format. It's several $100s to produce this, to engineer this. So we'd love to invite you to go online at Grace Explorations, that's plural with an S.com, click on the donate button. And many times when we have a physical base camp, we encourage guys to give $5. And so we have a little glass jar that they do that, or they give online. So if you could just take a moment and perhaps give online. I know economic uncertainty is at a premium right now. So you just do what God tells you to do, but we'd love to partner with you. We were originally intending on raising all the monies before we started this digital base camp live stream. And instead we just said, you know what, we're just going to jump into this in faith. So if you can help us with that, that would be greatly appreciated. There's a couple dozen people that actually support this ministry. They're our monthly partners. They're the backbone. And you can become one of those, which would be fantastic. You can do that online. There's fields that'll help with that, or a one-time gift just to help us keep this production going. Which brings me to my next point. Our next event is actually going to be on April the 19th with Dave McIntyre, who we're both familiar with. Dave is a friend of both of our ministries, and Dave is a master storyteller, and Dave is a unique individual in that if I was alone and isolated somewhere, Dave is the guy I'd want with me, because this guy knows a million ways to stay alive. But it's not just about the physicality of it, even though he does teach survival training techniques and is an expert in wilderness survival. What his story will emulate at our next session, which will be April the 19th, is we're going to talk about how to not only survive but thrive in isolation. Dave won the season 2 of History Channel's Alone show, and was actually flourishing at the end of that episode. He probably had another month and a half worth of food stored up and had already psychologically built himself up to the extent where he could have been in the wilderness way past the 66-day mark when he won the show. And so we're going to spiritualize that, if you will, and talk about what that's like to live in isolation and to thrive in that environment, to not just survive, but to go beyond that and actually find that there's some good things that can happen with this. So real quick, we're probably just going to be doing this every other week for the interim until we can actually get back into the breweries, which we're excited about, but we don't know when that date is. So for now, we're every other week. April 19th is going to be Dave McIntyre right here, so tune in at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And if you can, also go on our website at Grace Explorations, plural with an S.com, and you can also click on to sign up for our newsletter, which is there, and all those things. So we've got a couple questions here. We've had 222 viewers tonight, so we're super excited about that. Thanks for tuning in. We've never had that many come to a base camp before, so that's fantastic. And let's get a couple questions here real quick for Dave. I've got to put on my reading glasses. With these headphones, which is always a lot of fun. So, all right, here we go. This is a question for Dave. 2 questions. Okay, this is a very personal one here, so I'll try and see if I can, you can pass. But
okay.
If just, this is a delicate question. 2 questions. How do your brother's children interpret and tell the story, and what's been the impact on his kids? And what suggestions do you have for those? What suggestions do you have for those questions? If you can answer that, if you want to plead the fifth, then you can take that as well.
Yeah, I think in this context, I think I want to be very careful and very private with their journey. I would just say anybody that was close to Kurt, including his boys, were deeply, deeply impacted. And they're going to have to walk through their own grief over time with that, as we all are. But theirs is going to be unique to them. And I think the advice that I would give, and of course it has not been easy. It's been very difficult for them.
Yeah.
And I think my advice would be is with kids dealing with this, any kind of loss that's similar to that. I think you need to be patient with them. They're now young adults, processing this tragic deal in a new way, because they're now processing it as an adult as opposed to young men. And I think patience is the virtue here when it comes to watching people grieve something so complex. And so especially with the young ones, it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
And it may be a few years. into this where they're going to have to step back into the story and deal with it when they have the maturity and strength and fortitude to handle what has actually happened to them. So
time is the key word.
Time is the key, and everyone grieves differently.
Yep.
Everybody grieves in a different time. You can't force it. And so letting them walk through their own story in a patient way would be my advice.
Okay, here's another one. What suggestions do you have for those who feel they have no one to turn to? Because we've talked about safe communities. Maybe one of the things that was going through Kurt's mind was, gee, I don't know if I have anybody like that, which we both know to be untrue, but it felt emotionally true to him, which is really the diabolical nature of how we make decisions. I don't think hardly any of us really make decisions on what we know to be true. We base our decisions on what we feel to be true. And the enemy capitalizes on that. So this guy has got all this emotion coming up, or anybody for that matter. How do you, because that was probably a trigger point for some people, like, yeah, I tried that once, Pastor Phil, and I got burned. What would you say to that person, who may be struggling with, I don't know if I have somebody like that?
Well, no matter what your situation is, I think courage is a huge deal. I think it's one of the most courageous things for someone to share. I'm really struggling. I've made some horrible mistakes, and I need someone to know, and I need help. To Kurt's story, he had a ton of people around him and I know to a fact that there are dozens and dozens of people that would have walked with him if he would have said, this is where I've been. This is what's happened. I don't know about this person. This person may not have as many people. That may be a truth for that person. I still think there are counselors that can be called, Christian counselors that would hear that. I think there are pastors who can be called and say, this is where I'm at. We get those all the time in churches where people just say, I don't know who to turn to. You're the guy. And for some reason, I'm trusting you with this right now. And I would say, too, if you've been burned in the past, I'm so sorry for that. I really am. That's a message for the rest of us who get to receive and hear people's confessions. We need to be trustworthy people so people feel safe and feel that they can actually be helped. I say that to men's groups and to small groups that we lead all the time. You need to be a safe place. You need to build that safe. You cannot implode that safety in any way, because these small groups need to be places where people can be, can find healing and trust and like I said, to be safe. I would say there's times in my life where I'm a small groups pastor. I actually had a counselor say to me, I went to counseling 15 years ago, and I said, the guy says, so why are you here? And I says, I'm really tired, and I'm really lonely. He goes, you're a small groups pastor at a church. Why are you lonely? And after a few sessions, he realized you hold people at arm's length. You don't trust them. You as a pastor of small groups, of community at a church, need to let the people that are closest to you in a little bit further. They can handle it. You need to trust people more. And he was right. That was my story. I'd love to pray for that person. Just first of all, I truly believe that God gives us what we need.
Yeah.
And I'm betting there's someone in that person's life that they can say, okay, I'm going to be brave.
Yeah.
I'm going to risk this maybe again and say, okay, I need help. I need a friend. I need someone to walk me down this path.
Yeah. I want you to pray in just a moment, but I do want to maybe create a little bit of a profile of how you know if a person is safe or not. So one of the things that I've learned the hard way is the people that I trust the most are those that walk with a bit of a limp. And what I mean by that is these are men or women or whomever that have processed enough of their own pain that you're not coming to them as a person who is not already initiated. They've already come to grips with their own brokenness. In fact, that's why I'm attracted to the speakers that we have. A lot of these guys come in and they're like, I don't think I'm qualified to speak at base camp. And I'm like, no, you've actually failed enough that now you actually qualify. You failed forward. You're not wallowing in your failure or other people's failures or whatever the situation might be. You've actually learned from that. And so I trust you. And I think that may be what the whole example of Peter and Judas. Peter kept on with his story and Judas decided to exit his story. They both had done pretty much the same thing. and yet one stayed in the story, one exited the story. But I think the beauty of Peter's story is that he almost had to fail. He had to, his hubris, his spiritual arrogance, because he was just so absorbed in his own spiritual energy and in his own self-righteousness that he probably would have been not very useful for the kingdom had he have been the only one standing and everybody else ran at the time of the crucifixion. So if you're looking for safe people, find people that have embraced their own brokenness, their own humanity, but have also embraced the image of Christ within themselves. That when God actually looks at us, he sees us through the image of Christ. He sees a forgiven person. And that takes a lot of humility, because that actually deconstructs the ego, because now you're stepping into the realm of grace and you're stepping out of moralism or legalism, and you have to trust that, as my friend John Lynch would say, that on your very worst day, you're still an image bearer of the Lord Jesus Christ, that God still has the ability to see you through the eyes of his Son. So don't be careful with how you unpack these stories, because it can cause more damage, especially people that are not initiated, that are dealing with their own shame. They will unwittingly recast it on you, and they'll give you all these answers to fix you. And the beauty of what your two friends did at the coffee shop was they just allowed you to unpack. Yeah. Just be a human. Yeah. You don't have to have all the right answers. And if you want to shout out to God, that's okay in that given moment. And now we have a glimpse of the bandwidth of God, that he's able to handle all this and still love.
Yeah, a few things I would add to that. Approachability. Do you feel comfortable approaching? Does this person listen? When you're talking, do they listen? Are they waiting to just spew something out that's in their head while you're listening?
Yeah.
Are they empathetic? You touched on that. Do they understand your pain? Have they felt it before? Have they walked through something before? Are they seasoned in their faith and mature in that? Are they grace-filled? That's another important word. Are they going to be very punitive and shake their finger at you? I think those are the type of people that will listen, they'll empathize, they'll process with you, and then they'll give really good nuggets of next steps. Why don't you try this? And then they make a commitment to you. I'll walk alongside you. I'm not going to fix your problem. You got to make the right choices, but I'll help you. I'll be there. I'll be next to you.
Yeah.
I'm not leaving.
That's powerful. One last question, and then we're done. And then I'd like you to close in prayer for us, if you would. What do you do with the people that are left behind? And you've probably had to process yourself. We've talked about that on the phone. I think of the would have, could have, should haves. You know, did I miss something? Could I have said something? And this deep sense of blame. Yeah. And that can go three different directions. I think we've talked on the phone of how that usually splinters into three areas. Either the person blames himself. I could have done more. I could have helped rescue this person. Or they blame the person, which is the easiest, to demonize the actual individual that's made a poor choice. Or maybe most diabolical of all, and this is where our theological framework just disintegrates, is we blame God. Yeah. And then we get into this thorn bush of, now God must be bad because life is bad, and we can't separate those two issues, that God is always good, is always a good surgeon, is always trying to go after the wound in a redemptive way, not in a punitive way, although there may be discipline involved. As we talked about, you know, if you don't disclose, God will do it for you, not to destroy you, but to actually heal you. And it's a scalpel blade. But what would you say with someone that's just struggling with either blaming God, themselves, or the person, and they can't get past that particular issue?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think that's a natural thing to do. I think everyone in our situation, including myself, look back at ways of, well, if I would have looked in this different place on that day, I would have found him. Then we would have had that conversation, and then that would have changed the story. But why didn't I do that? I didn't do that. I didn't find him. We didn't drive down the right streets. Going back, why didn't I see this coming? How could have I seen this coming? Was Kurt trying to reach out to me and I ignored it? All those things just swell up in you, and you get into that what if. And so the first thing I say, it's natural. And it's okay to go there, but you can't stay there.
Yeah.
In my faith, I go to the sovereignty of God. When there's things that I cannot explain, like a pandemic, like a suicide of a close friend, where I can't put my finger on this. I can't explain it all. I don't have all the information. But who does? Who knows it all? Who's in control of it all? Whether I like what he's doing or not, God is still sovereign. And so I've come to believe that the sovereignty of God is not something I can always explain, but the sovereignty of God is something I need to trust. If I'm trying to explain it all the time, I'm always going to come up short because God is so infinite, so big. There's so much to him that I simply don't know in my finite mind and heart. And so I'm not going to explain all the things he's up to and what he's doing, but I have to come down to, do I trust him?
Yeah.
And if I trust him, I'm trusting in his sovereignty. I'm trusting that God is doing something good and something powerful, that he knows, that he cares, that he's involved, and he's engaged in whatever thing I'm involved in. And I need to somehow open my hands up to say, God, this is yours. I can't explain this anymore, and I can't beat myself up anymore for the what ifs or what could have. God, this is yours.
Yeah.
And I trust you with it.
Yeah.
This has happened. It's real, but it's yours. Now I trust you.
I'm going to ask Phil to close us in prayer, but he brings up a very important word there in closing, and it's this word called trust. And it's kind of different than belief, because belief gives acquiescence or gives this certain sense of God exists, and we believe that, right? But it's a whole other thing to trust God. And maybe at the end of the day, that's what this whole story is really about. It's just trusting God as a child would, a loving father, if you would. And we're going to invite you into prayer here. And I just want you to imagine your own being, your own emotions, your mental facilities, your body, whatever it is that you need to trust God with. I just want to invite you and encourage you to just imagine yourself in a free fall into the hands of Almighty God, where that you know that what you're going through right now has first passed through his hands to touch you, and that he knows everything that's going on, and he's sovereign, and his plan is good, and he's a good surgeon that sometimes allows for hurt in our lives to heal us. Just trust him. And it's a hard word, because some of us have been let down by people, and it could be people that should have been representing God in our lives. And let's be honest and vulnerable, and let's see that God is beyond our own image of him, that he exists apart from that, and that he is ultimately good and ultimately trustworthy. So Phil, can you lead us in prayer here as we close our time together?
God, we come to you first with grateful hearts. In all the heaviness and difficulty in us and around us, the first thing I think we should say is thank you. Thank you for loving us to the point of sacrifice, where you, the God of the universe who knows all and has done all, gave everything for us. God, as we approach Holy Week and Easter, God, we celebrate your incredible sacrifice of sending your son to die for the countless mistakes that we've made. And that, God, we live in a broken world, and we're broken inside. And you have come to make us whole. You have offered us redemption. You've bought our sins with your blood. You've offered us forgiveness where we can be free. We don't have to work our way back to a relationship with you. You've given us grace. You've given us mercy. You've given us forgiveness. And all we have to do is believe. All we have to do is trust. Nothing more. So God, may we rest in you. May we rest in your good gift to us. And God, I pray for each individual that's listened tonight, wherever they are in their current situation, whether it's wrestling through pandemic issues. Am I going to have a job next week? Am I going to get sick? Am I going to die? Am I going to know somebody that's going to get sick and die? And maybe people are wrestling with, my goodness, I know what it's like to be Kurt. I know what it's like to carry that hidden life and not know who to turn to. And first of all, I pray, God, that you will provide your presence around them. May you give them, through your Spirit, confidence and strength, fortitude to step out into the light and to say, God, I'm yours, dirt and all, mess and all. Will you forgive me? And God, will you give me people that can walk alongside me? Give me the ability to trust. May I trust you, and may I trust your people. And I just pray that God will begin to do some restorative work so we can be like you. God, we thank you for your love. We thank you for our stories. We thank you for all you've done for us. We worship you and we honor you. It's in your precious name we say, amen.
Amen. Friends, don't be afraid. God is with us. He's for us. And if that's true, then there's nothing of any significance that could be against us. So tune in 2 weeks from today at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, April the 19th. We're going to walk through another story that will also shed some tears and touch some hearts. Thank you so much for tuning in here at Base Camp live stream. We'll see you in 2 weeks.